Patrick, that's your camera.
That's my camera there. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll point you.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome all of you who are joining us online, and just to thank you so much for taking your time to register and to join us this afternoon for a great conversation. This is the second of a four-part series of webinars that Good Governance Africa is doing in partnership with the Mail and Guardian. My name is Patrick Kulati. I serve as the CEO of Good Governance Africa, and our vision is to create a continent where citizens are empowered, where governments are effective, and where businesses thrive, so as to improve the lives of people on the ground. And we do this here in South Africa. We have an office in Ethiopia, Ghana, as well as Nigeria. We're in the process of expanding, and so Good Governance Africa is here to really promote and entrench good governance in the whole of the continent. We partner with so many people, and so today we have a great panel here, and I really want to say thank you so much for joining us. And I just want to give kudos to the Mail and Guardian. They are partnering with us. If you read the newspaper, you can find more about what is happening here and the following webinars. We have them every second Tuesday up until just after the elections. So please feel free to join us and to ask your questions. If you have any questions online, you can send them on the link that you have there, so that when we have a moment after having a conversation or in between, we look at the questions that you ask and then get the panelists to address them. Now, 2002, 2003, 2004, a group of a much younger looking group met for a number of months in a farm, or on a farm called Monde Lot in the Western Cape. We were brought in by the Africa Leadership Institute, the UN, as well as the University of Western Cape. We had a long list of people from South Africa and the rest of the continent, people from various backgrounds that came, and our main task was to spend months meeting there to develop scenarios. We're looking forward to 2020, saying, how would South Africa look like in 2020? Imagine, we're young, in our 30s, 20s, and then we came up with 4 scenarios. The first scenario was the dead end. If certain policies or decisions were made, our country was going to go onto a dead end, where we would have self-serving leadership, corruption, and all sorts of things that would lead to societal decline. So that was one scenario. The second one was a sharp right turn, which meant that there would be a focus on just economic growth to the exclusion of social empowerment and things like that, just to make sure that the economy grows and we let people see to themselves. That would have been the second one. Third one was a slow puncture. Now, this one was the continuation of a status quo. Just keep things doing the things that you've been doing. Do not do anything. But there was the fourth one, which we all agreed was the best scenario. And it was called All Aboard the Dual Carriageway. It took into consideration a number of variables, including racial issues, including economic status issues, including social issues. There was a lot that we're taking into consideration. And so today you are here. And among this group that we have, there's one guy who was there at the time, and it is my honor and privilege to introduce them to you on this webinar with this topic, the need for ethical leadership in South Africa 30 years after democracy. I'm talking about Mr. Ronny Mkhwanazi. He was there as I said, when we were working on those scenarios. He's a corporate and trade lawyer, the master's degree in international business law, and he's a founder of Mkhwanazi Incorporated. And I think he's going to talk to us about that. How are you doing, man?
I'm very well. Thank you for having me, Patrick. I think I must commend you as well for continuing the conversation.
Yeah,
I think we need it more than we think we do. And then thank you for that. And I'm great. I'm in a good space, and I'm excited to be here as well.
Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
All right. On his left is a great author. Miss Bafedile Bopape. I used to work with a guy called Bopape. I'll tell you his name just now. I forgot to ask you about it. She wrote a book which is called A Government on Life Support, Win It Off. I'm interested to really try to get to know a bit more about what the story behind that book. I thought I was going to be able to read it before this, but I got sick. I couldn't. And she is a former public sector executive with many years of experience in the public sector. We thought she could be a great contributor. Welcome. How are you doing?
Thank you. I'm fine.
Yeah.
Thank you, Patrick. I'm also grateful to be part of this dialogue.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy that you could make it and be here today to add so much value. On my left here, immediate left, we've got Miss Fatima Rawat, ethics subject matter expert at the Ethics Institute. Is it Ethics Institute of South Africa? Just the Ethics Institute. All right. They are involved in organizational ethics issues. She's a certified ethics officer, experienced in governance, legal ethics, and she's also an admitted attorney, although she's not practicing.
That's right.
Welcome. How are you doing?
I'm good, thanks. Thanks, Patrick. Thanks for having us, and thanks for allowing the Ethics Institute this platform to be with you and the colleagues today.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that you're here. Colleagues, those of you who would have seen the advert for this, we had said that we're going to have the fourth participant. His name is Mr. Lot Ndlovu. Mr. Monde Lot Ndlovu, Managing Director of the Black Management Forum. Unfortunately, he has had to attend to something. As soon as he finishes with that, he's going to make his way here. He has been in touch with me to tell me that he's trying to make his way right here. He wanted to be here so much. And so let's get started, colleagues. Let me start with you, Ronny.
Yes.
Think back to 2002, 2003, man. You're much younger then. And I mean, we haven't seen each other since that time.
My goodness.
Yeah, but you look great, man. It's a
Thank you so much.
Clearly, you're looking well after yourself.
Thank you.
So let's just go back there. What was in your mind then? What were you doing before you were asked, and how did you find yourself participating in the scenario development?
Yes. Oh, thank you so much. You know, the first thing that came as a surprise to me was how I was, invited to become part of this, because I was told that they're looking for, South Africans who are achievers and all of that. And I was still very young, to be. And I mean, looking at the type of people we had there, we had very senior, especially political people. If I remember, we had someone like Renette Dalia. I don't know if you recall from the.
She used to be the DA. Yes,
we had other senior leaders who were there. We had people from business, and the mix was really interesting, to say the least, And it was, I remember, a very gruesome process. We had to fly firstly to the Western Cape every month for a period of over 15 months or so. We spent a lot of time ventilating the issues. For most of us, it was the first time we were in a scenario planning. Of any sort, and I was very, impressed by the knowledge that the Afli guys had, the Leadership Institute that was facilitating the session, and so on. And I recall how the South African story was unfolding in that little room where we were sitting, and how the conversations would continue way into the wee hours of the morning,
Robust.
Robust discussions. I mean, I would go to sleep around 12 midnight and I could still hear Donovan speaking.
Oh, yeah. He was here 2 weeks ago, sitting right where you were.
Arguing his point, and I mean, we've become good friends since. But I must say that, as I was talking about the South African story unfolding, what happened is we had very emotional discussions as well.
Yeah.
In fact, there were times when we all thought the thing was going to collapse.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember the famous Afro-pessimism debate we had.
I remember.
We were a diverse group of young people. We had all races, etc. And those tensions eventually came out. There were some sessions where I thought people would actually jump over the table and grab each other. But I'm grateful that we had a mature group of people. Whatever we couldn't resolve, inside the meeting, we would resolve during a match of rugby at night. And then tomorrow we'd come refreshed and so on. So it was really taxing from that point of view, the time, the energy required, the discussions and the debates, and so forth. But coming to the scenarios themselves, I must say that, prior to our scenarios, we actually had another Montfleur scenarios. I think that was in the early 90s. So shortly just
1992. They were preparing for 1994.
Yes, and if you remember on that one, we had people like Trevor Manuel, Tito Mboweni.
Yes.
We had sort of, what we would call perhaps the political elite at the time. They were the guys in the forefront. And in fact, they were still, if you remember, on the other side. They were not in government yet, So we had those scenarios. So we came in at a time when the bar was set very high because there had already been scenarios. Some of them were invited to come to speak to us, including Ubabusaki Makozoma himself and some of them. And so we really had to know our story when we came out of that, and I think that was done brilliantly. I mean, the way the scenarios were captured, the arguments around what type of scenario, how we want to capture the scenarios, and deciding to use road signs. As our imaging, if you like. You would recall in the early 90s, you also had someone like Clem Santa, who was sort of leading the scenario planning, and they had some scenarios. I think one of them was called Chicken Licker, if I'm not mistaken. So we really had to
make people hungry.
and the like. So we did get. I think the scenarios, I was asking some of my colleagues, when they saw the picture on the other day, I posted, what do they think?
Yeah.
And one of them just jumped out to say, oh no, dead end, And I said to him, but is it possible perhaps that there could be a combination of factors? Because it can't just be one,
All right.
And then what I've seen is there's some things we were completely off the mark on.
Yes.
One that comes to mind, for example, was the issue that we sort of thought that by 2020 the ruling party would have lost power, right? The ruling party is still very much in power, but I think though since that time it has always become a possibility, that we may not. Another thing we got wrong was around the HIV pandemic. We thought that the health system was going to collapse. Based on what was happening at the time. I mean, you'll recall this was a time when there was a lot of court cases on ARV, and that kind of thing. And so we thought that the health system was going to crumble by 2020. And then, fortunately, science
there was a lot of
us.
pessimism.
Yeah, of course. Science also overtook us. There was a lot of medicines that came into the market, and that saved us. Of course, we didn't foresee COVID.
All right.
Etc. So those are just some of the few things I think I've picked up, since then, and I'm sure as we continue, we'll
yes, I think that background is quite good in the sense that even those of us who were not there can actually just put their minds to that time to see what was going on. Remember, we had even a guy whose father founded Orania.
Yes.
So that caused a lot of tension. Other people were saying, how can you allow this person here? So you can imagine. So this was a great thing. But I think what I want to tease out from that, which I think is relevant for all of us who are now here, now that we've got a bit of a background, and thank you so much for sketching that out, Ronny, is that on the scenario that we looked into, one of the conditions that we said needed to be in place for that scenario, which was called all aboard the carriageway, which was the best scenario, that we had ethical leadership, you had the best running economy, a government, a society that was carrying. It was like everything that we think should happen in the country. The bedrock or the condition that we thought could actually work was ethical leadership. For this to happen, you need to have ethical leadership.
True.
When we were talking offline, you shared some insights about this. Just tell us, what is ethical leadership? You also talked about effective leadership. Yeah, just give us your thoughts on this topic.
Okay, great, thanks. So when we maybe perhaps just take a step back and unpack the words ethics and leadership.
Yes.
So when we think about the word ethics, we say in its simplest form, ethics is about doing what is good both for the self as well as for the other. So that concept of balance is critical, because if I only did what was good for me, it would make me selfish. And if I only did what was good for someone else, I'd probably end up compromising myself in that. So when we use that analogy of ethics, that's very much at a personal level. But then we come into an organization, and now I'm a leader. So I bring my personal ethics into the context of an organization. And there's an expectation that I'm going to do something within that context of the organization. And then we make the distinction around organizational ethics. So when we talk about ethics in the context of an organization, and we take guidance from the King Code of Corporate Governance, it's about applying our values and what we stand for as an organization to the way in which we make decisions, to the way in which we conduct ourselves, and the impact we have on society and others. Now, bring the two together. It's then, when we think about ethical leadership, it's about people of integrity or a person of ethics who comes into the organization and can steer the organization in a way to achieve its mandate, but also to create that environment in that organization that it's easy to do the right thing, setting the tone, leading the example. So important for us when we have this conversation around ethics and leadership to put the two together and to contextualize it and to understand that when we talk about ethical leadership, there's also a variety of types of leaders who drive the organization. So they could be at a board level, they could be at a managerial level. And when we talk about leadership, what do we talk about?
And we're not just talking about the person at the top, but we're talking about people just right through the organization who may be holding some responsibilities. Is that correct?
And maybe just to end off on that introduction, every theme of the King Code of Corporate Governance, or every iteration of the King Code of Corporate Governance had this particular theme. And King 4 is all about ethics and ethical leadership. And that really points to show us how critical the issues of ethics and ethical leadership are to the issues of good governance. And the language of King is all about both ethical as well as effective leadership. So it's about the combination of people of integrity, but also competence. And being able to put the two together. So when we have this dialogue about ethical leadership, these components of ethics, of competence, of integrity, and of what do we then do in the context of an organization are very critical.
I think you just raised a couple of important points there that about the individual, but personal ethics that you take with you to the organization. But also I think the other thing that you really mentioned for me, which is this issue of integrity and competency. Because sometimes we think it's one or the other. But you're saying for effective leadership to take place, you have to have those two. Bafedile, you worked in government for years. You don't look like you are a retired person, but you look so, but you spent years in government. And then you wrote a book. And let's start there. What is your book about? And just tell us from your experience, how is the culture of ethics sort of incubated and supported within the government sector? You can take it whatever way you want.
Thank you. As you've mentioned, I wrote a book I mean, just by its title,
Yes.
you know, that it's a government on life support, it means something is wrong.
Yes.
How did the
I'm very
government
interested to find out about
how did the government end up, you know, in ICU?
Mm.
Yes, it's true. I've been there for many years, 28 years, and
28
I must
years.
say yes, 28 years and 24 years as a senior manager.
Yes.
Yes.
You were a chief of staff. You were a chief
Yes.
director.
Yes.
You did it all.
I've been, yes, actually, I worked with I reported to 5 DGs directly. I was supporting them as the head of the office for 5 DGs. And then I was once chief of staff of the minister. And just that, you can see that I've been exposed both in the administration and the political side of things.
Yeah.
Yes. So,
we want to have the
I
juicy
know. Yes. As such, I'm able to know where the problems are.
Yeah.
You know, in terms of the relationship between the politics, the government, and the state. Yes.
Okay.
So, and which is, as you said earlier on, it's very important what you said, that this is about people learning, or we sharing. And in the process, people will learn some of the things that they may not have known.
Yes.
You know, for example, the issue of that there is a government and there is a state. You know, so the governments come and go, and the state remains. So it means what is important is that as the citizens of this country, we must make sure that the state is always protected from politics. You know, yes. The politicians politics is their job, as long as they don't meddle in the administration. So also, maybe to cut the long story short, you know, when we complain about service delivery, it has to be clear who delivers services, you know, to the people. The government, which is now the ruling party, they would indicate, or they'll talk about their manifestos, their agendas, what is it that they want to see happening in the country. It is the duty of the public servants to translate that into implementable actions, you know. So, and that's where we have a problem. Actually, that's where a lot of work needs to be done. We need a dialogue about, you know, what the public servants, or what the role of the public servants, and also the relationship, as I said, with the government. Because also the reason we're having a problem now in the country, it's because the current government, you know, started politicizing the state. And that is a problem. Then you no longer know who's a politician, who's a public servant, and their roles are very clear.
So basically, you're trying to navigate there should be a difference between there should be a line between public service and the public administration and the political side of things.
Yes. And I'm saying in summary that irrespective of which party will be in government in the next elections, for example, they may still fail if we still have the same public servants that I talk about in the book. Yes.
Now, before we move, because first you have the public sector background, you've got the private sector background, you've got the ethical, you know, training and things like that. So we've got a great panel here. Now, let me just stay with you, Bafedile, on this issue. you know, when you read newspapers and we look at the public sector, we sort of brush them all with one paint. They're corrupt, you know, they are greedy, you know, they this and that. How are people inside there working? What institutions and systems are there to help people that say, I want to do the best that I can? Because a lot of these people are highly trained, they're highly qualified, and many of them are committed. So what support systems are there to make sure that they are delivering on their public mandate, regardless of what the politics are about or whatever party? So do you sense that there is support for people like that, both within government but also from outside? Are you feeling demoralized that we all paint you with the same brush, even those that are trying?
Yes, it is actually that way that we feel demoralized if we are all painted with the same brush. But I want to go back to what you said earlier. Remember when the new democratic government came in?
Yes.
I always ask people to say, currently, what is it that you are complaining about as the South African citizens? And they'll say service delivery. And I said, think back. In the first administration and the second administration, were we complaining like this? Were you complaining about service delivery at that time? And they said, no, it was fine. And I said, why? That's why I say, it means between the first administration and the second administration, moving to the third administration around 2009, something happened. Because if you recall, definitely, when we started, we were doing well. As the delivery was fine, you know. All of a sudden, boom.
Something happened.
Something happened. What is it that happened? And that's what we need to understand. I'm actually listening to the scenarios, what you're saying about the scenarios. And then I'm laughing and I'm saying, you know what? 30 years into democracy, and we are still searching. We're still searching for a democratic ideal, you know, which is, you know, more influenced by this ethical leadership.
All right.
So I'm saying, when are we going to say, now we have grip of this democratic ideal, you know?
Yeah, I think conversations like these help us to actually get to that, because I think we're learning from what you guys are saying. Now, I just want to refer back to what we said in the scenario. For example, we called for bold and visionary leadership whose primary motivation is to serve others, that accepts the need for calculated risks. Remember that if you're running anything, an organization, you've got to give and take. You have to have risks and things like that, including going against conventional and dominant wisdom if the underlying problems of poverty, unemployment, inequality are to be addressed. Now, based on your experiences and observations of having seen the state since 1994, how has the South African leadership in the public and the private sector performed against this? Are there glimpses of hope, or is it all bleak? Let's come to you, Ronny.
Look, in terms of, I think generally, we want to link the point that Fatima made as well, that it means when you say bold, you actually mean bold ethical leadership, because you can have a bold leader who's totally unethical, and then his boldness leads us, you know, astray, if you like, you know. So I think, however, that, you know, what I have observed is that over the years, I mean, when I think back to my student activist days, right, the worst thing we could do as a form of campaigning or rebellion on campus would be to litter the campus.
Yeah.
And then over the years, you see now it includes burning a laboratory, burning a school, etc., etc. So I think there's been an erosion of this ethical leadership we're talking about, and I think not just in the political sense, because we people are generally inclined to say politicians are this, but it's actually a societal problem. And we kept saying in the scenarios to emphasize that we're not only talking about political leadership, we're talking of leadership, civil society, and in every corners of the world where we find ourselves. So, and one of the things you see that we have failed as leadership in general is that we still don't have a great relationship between the state and business, right? Which is a cause for concern, because the state cannot create jobs. They need business to do that, and business, needs a responsive state to be able to execute, and the state needs an interested business to want to help. But it's sort of almost a standoff where business is standing on the one side, and everybody else on the other side, trying to see what's going to happen next. Let's wait and see how this is going to go and what the rent is going to do. Then we'll decide whether we want to. So it doesn't appear that there's ownership. A collective ownership, if you like. I think one of the words that kept coming out in the scenarios was what was called a collusion of the elite. Which I think I've also seen, and which is also worrisome, because what that means is that you sort of have your party of elites, all together, living together in barbed wire states and living a happy life, but everybody else is on the outside, which is counterproductive, and so forth. So I really think that the ethical leadership element, I mean, this came across, especially during the Zondo Commission, I mean, in the public sense, so to speak, just as an example of what would happen in an institution, right? So one of the things which we are fortunate about in South Africa is that we have very strong, governance frameworks, right? Whether it be legislative or codes like the King Code and all of that, we're really strong there, because just to give you an example, in some of the African countries, if you want to do business with the government, you just need to go to the minister's office, get a letter of appointment, and you're happy, and life happens. But here, that's the reason why what happened during state capture is that because we couldn't bend the rules and the laws. I'm now talking about the people with questionable ethics. You couldn't bend the laws of the rules. What you then had to do was to remove the people that are custodians and who are knowledgeable of what needs to happen, because they sort of become stumbling blocks to your unethical agenda that you have, And so now, but this one is standing in our way. He's the CEO. He thinks he knows a lot. So we're just going to suspend him, and he's going to go and sit at home. And we're going to bring in someone who's acting.
And we're going to do what we want.
We can do what we want, and then hence you see there's a lot of acting as well in the state, because there's a challenge around trust and all of that, and I mean, it's also almost as if there's, I mean, what Bafedile was saying, that it must be a very painful thing to every day go to work, and in the back of your mind being considered as this corrupt guy, or this corrupt human being, and etc. It's really disheartening. And I mean, I feel for the public servants, because most of that information is actually incorrect, in a sense that if you had to take, an organization, some of the organizations that have been implicated in corruption, and you actually look at what happened there, it's not even the man on the street. It's not the man on the railway line who's corrupt. It's not the man on the train line or whatever. It's the guy in the boardroom, So hence the fish rots from the head, as the saying goes, and all of that. So I really think that there's an opportunity, for ongoing dialogue. But we first need to, I think, have some form of consensus to say that we are interested in solving our problems as a society. We need to start from somewhere. And
this is where I'd like to bring you in, Fatima, because he's talking about the boardroom and things like that. You tell us about the work that you do in the Ethics Institute in terms of getting in, empowering, just dealing with these issues both in the private and the public sector. Just tell us a bit, or take whatever take you want to take on what we've said.
So I'd like to share with you a little bit about a project that we're working on, which we consider a collective action project. And collective action would really think about like when we think about the problems around corruption, the National Anti-Corruption Strategy also talks about a whole of society approach.
Yeah.
Because as much as we're affected as a whole of society, we're also stakeholders in being part of the solution.
Yeah.
And we're working on a project called the Local Government Ethical Leadership Initiative. And it's a project that we work on in partnership with the National Department of Cooperative Governance.
Yes.
SALGA, the Model Regeneration Movement, and ourselves.
Yeah.
And essentially the project emanated from the Local Government Anti-Corruption Strategy, and it says we don't need more rules and we don't need more laws.
Yeah.
But what we're missing
Yes.
actually are the values or the spirit of ethical leadership. And what is this thing and what are we talking about?
Yeah.
And so we engaged in a quite an extensive consultative process. But part of the project, and very critical to the sustainability of the project, is that we have a strong advisory council. And that advisory council is made up of civil society leaders. So Father Mkhwanazi is our chair.
Yes.
And we've got Ruth Meyer and Mosisiwa Mabuso and Miriam van Donk and Justice Yvonne Mahoro as part of the civil society leadership together with our ex-officio partners who guide us in this project. And one of the things we did before we embarked, the idea was to come up with a governance code for local government leaders to talk about what is this thing called ethical leadership, what are the values and the spirit of ethical leadership. But we started by asking people, what is ethical leadership?
Yeah.
And then what gets in the way of ethical leadership? And when we asked people, what for you does ethical leadership look like? We spoke to councillors and officials and civil society. The issues of courage came up very strong.
Courage.
Bravery, the ability to speak the truth, the ability to stand up to power, strong morals and values, competence, integrity, good governance are all elements that make up this notion of what is ethical leadership. And it was very critical for us to get that understanding because local government is complex. So to Bafedile's point about the politicization of government, one takes it one step further in local government because of the interface being so much more intense. In the public service, there's a little bit of a greater distance. But in local government, that political administrative interface is that much much closer. And when we then said to people, well, if that's what you think ethical leadership is, what gets in the way of ethical leadership? And the first thing that comes up is the politicization of local government.
Okay.
And specifically, then one is able to dissect that a little bit further and talk about what makes it difficult. And the one is the political administrative interface. So in legislation, the line is clear. You don't cross the line. You don't decide whose supplier as a politician who's going to be appointed. The line is, but that line does get crossed. And another major indicator is then the kind of inappropriate use of deployment practices. So how it's intended to apply and how it's actually then being played out in practice are two very different realities. So the intention of the deployment practices is that you put people in strategic positions who are able to then carry out what the party's strategic intent is.
That issue of integrity and competency comes in very handy here.
And so you find people then being placed into positions that are not necessarily strategic positions. And there's a whole myriad of dynamics that unplay. And one of the things that come out in the research include that somebody could be placed lower down in the organization, but could be politically senior to someone who's administratively senior. And that creates the whole other complexity. And so it makes the effective running of the administration complex because there then becomes this whole other relationships that start to play themselves out that are not the original intents of running an effective administration that get into the way of that. So before I share a little bit more about the code, maybe just to also say that we also have been fortunate through the strength of partnerships to do the public sector ethics survey.
Okay.
So we do that together with the Department of Public Service and Administration, with SALGA and with COGTA and with other colleagues.
Yeah.
And And we've done it in 2015, we've done it in 2018, and we've done it in 2022. So we now have some comparative data that we're able to then see. And so the language of ethics is becoming more familiar. And so to Bafidile's point, yes, there are ordinary public servants who are trying very hard to do their jobs and who are in difficult circumstances.
Yes, right.
And when we ask them, what is the one thing that you think will make a difference to the ethical culture within the public service, the first thing that they point out to is ethical leadership. So the need for ethical and competent leadership comes out. And the second is then consequence management and accountability. Yeah.
This is very important, just to bring on board those people that have just joined us, just to say, if you just joined us and you found us along the way, we are talking about the need for ethical leadership in South Africa, 30 years after democracy. Clearly, from what we're hearing, even from the data, I was perusing your report here, Fatima, trying to just get to grips, but I realized that there's a lot of meat into it. Clearly, what was heartwarming for me also was the fact that government is taking these things seriously. When I was doing public policy those years ago, there used to be that thing which was called Batupile. I think that if that could be implemented as it is, a lot could be done. So now we're going to come back just to look into some of the issues that have come up here. Firstly, I mean, you mentioned the Zondo Commission, and I just want to throw a question here. One of the key observations that I made was that leading up to the Zondo Commission, there were professions that we trusted, like your profession, the legal, academic. Academic was there selling certificates these days, but accounting, auditing, those were respected, the banking system. But what was found out was that there was a lot that they did to enable corruption and malfeasance in the country, meaning that those people that we trusted in those professions, that they would close the gap for ethical behavior, didn't do that. What should be done in terms of re-engineering those professions, not just those, even people like religious leaders, for example? It's just has been a mess that has just come out, where we see a lot of professions that were trusted as the pillars of integrity, but actually these people were found to be, consulting firms, for example, were found to be enablers of corruption. So any take on this one?
Yes, let me come in there. Well, as we said, there are different kinds of leaderships or levels, or, there's leadership in government, in the private sector, and there's leadership in politics, So maybe let's start with this one of politics, or politicians. And then I'll come to the one of the public administration. If you, like today, or the upcoming elections, you are elected as a leader. Once you hear about it, you may get excited that people have confidence in you. But if after midnight the same day, you're not worried, then you must worry.
Why should I worry?
You must worry. You must worry that you are not worried, because leadership is not a child's play. It's a big deal, because it's not about you. It's not about you. Leadership is not obsessed with self. If once you are there, then you only think of how powerful you are going to be, or how rich you are going to be, then immediately you must start worrying that, either you do two things, you pick up a phone and say to the people that, you know what, I don't think I'll do this. Or you kneel down and pray. And when you kneel down and pray, you must pray for wisdom. You'll recall that in the Bible, Solomon, when God asked him what he can give, he said wisdom. So all this has to do with wisdom. Wisdom to be able to make sound decisions or judgments, wisdom that will enable you to make, decisions that would have a good outcome. Or
not just for you.
Not for you. and really, how can you not worry when you are a political leader and you know that, by the way, all these millions of people in South Africa depend on me. How can you sleep that night? So you will have to say, you know what, like Solomon, you ask God for wisdom.
All right.
Wisdom to be able to make those decisions. And then let me come back to what you said in terms of those that we trusted. Well, within government, and I'm actually saying that in the book, that we need to review our recruitment and selection, policies or processes. I'm saying, for example, a public servant. When you become a public servant, you must understand what it means by being a servant. It's like a leader. You must know that you are going to be a servant of the people. So I don't know how. That's why I said in my book that I'm mobilizing, the citizens, those with expertise, to come and say, one example is this one. How will we determine during an interview that this person really wants to work as a public servant? And I'm also defining what a servant is or what a public servant is. So we need to look at those things for us to be able to get the right people, in the public sector. But one last thing, the issue of the value system. The value system, it's very important. And value system is, influenced by upbringing, education, personal experiences. So if you have not been brought well, I know people can change, but once you have that value system, living with that, it's going to be difficult for you. That's why when you are appointed as a CEO or a DG and you see a lot of money for the first time, then if you don't have good value system, then you're going to start thinking of
this is my opportunity.
Robbing the system.
You're raising an important issue of family value systems and things like that. This is where people come from, and it does appear from just observation that those values have been broken. But I'd like Ronny and Fatima to just come back if you have any comments on this issue I was talking about of these of these professions. What needs to be done to recover the value system that Bafedile is talking about, especially in professions that have been tattered, whose reputation have been tattered going forward? You've got young people that are growing up who want to be an accountant, but they hear a big accounting firm is being involved in a scandal, and yet they want to be. So what needs to be done? Is it training? Is it what is it that needs to be done?
if I come in there, I think firstly we need to take the knowledge and education and lessons about ethical leadership back to the education system. You know,
yes.
I mean, we don't have obviously I've been out of school for a long time, but I don't think in primary school and high school you would have anything related to, you know, ethics and
Never even
and social
thought.
conduct and
it
those
can
kind of
be.
things. You know, citizenship, for example.
Exactly.
I had a kid from a school saying they're doing something on digital citizenship, and asked him what that is. They were just teaching them how to behave on the internet, etc. So almost need something akin to that to take it back. You know, so that, because as Bafedile said, it's true. You're a creature of your environment. You know, and where you come from most of the time. It's either you're the apple that falls from far from the tree, or you know, you're just the apple that remains on the tree, and then your character and habits then come out. I wrote an article lately, one of the sins of being a scholar, a few months ago, which is titled the character of a nation.
Okay.
And what this the take home from this article was to say that how a country or a people are perceived, right, by other countries and other citizens is a reflection of the values that society represents, right?
Yes.
So in other words, if you go around the world and someone says, I like South Africans because they are like this and this and this and that,
Yeah.
it's not because of a South African celebrity or whoever they saw, it's because of the people.
Yeah.
You know, most of the time when people ask them what do they like about South Africa, the tourists from international, they say they like, you know, Ubuntu, basically, you know, that we have as South Africans. So that means that's a value that we have, you know, as a society. And then we need to then be mindful of the fact that that character of a nation is built by the individual characters that we have as people, and eventually that becomes the character of a society. Right? So which means that we all have a responsibility, you know, to build the type of characters that will perceive us as being a great nation and a great people. And what has been found is that societies that invest on building character and cohesion and all of that, in the long run are more successful because they're all pulling on the same gear, if you know what I mean, you know, as opposed to when we're all pulling into different directions. Some of the time it's purely a matter of ignorance, you know, in terms of, you know, people, you know, not wanting to be ethical or not understanding what it is. So usually what we do when we do, you know, board trainings for corporates and stuff, we normally say, try and involve everyone, you know, don't make it a board thing, you know, don't make governance and ethics and compliance a board thing.
Don't make it an elitist.
You need to make it an organizational thing, so that the chairperson of the board and the cleaner of the company have the same understanding of what corporate governance is, you know. So because we tempted as the elite, I suppose, you know, the collusion of the elite coming back again to sort of want to isolate, you know, and go to breakaways and, you know, have a good time and come back with our own understanding. You know, but you know, in Tabiseng there, who's you know, an assistant, you know, manager or whatever, has no clue, you know, what ethics are or how even to go about it and so forth. So I think it's an ongoing education that we need to establish, Patrick, you know, to make sure that we also walk the talk as leaders, as I've said, you know, and lead by example, because what my son sees in me influences what he becomes in future. And if I'm a cut corners type of guy, guess what? You know, I have a cut corners kind of son. And so it proliferates in society. But regarding the professions, I think I wouldn't. Yes, you have, you know, the you know, those people that were implicated in all of that. And most of the time it's a clique of people who, you know, come together and realize they can do things under the table together, and they, you know, then but there's a lot of good, I think, and ethical professionals who really want to maintain, you know, ethical leadership and ethical standards and so on. And we should also, you know, not try to paint everyone with the same brush. But for this one, I must tell you, for the first time, I'll speak for the lawyers. On the Zondo Commission, for example, you'll realize that of all the professions that were implicated, the law firms were nowhere to be found. I mean, I've never seen, you know, a major finding against the law firm for having given wrong advice or ill advice and all of that. You know? and I
Except in
think
the rent.
and if you think about it,
Yeah.
the law has actually saved us from a lot of grief we could have been into, you know, because there were a lot of decisions that were taken that either a political party or civil society would take to court, and that decision would be set aside. You know, so we could have been in a worse situation without the law, you know, as an equalizer towards this. So
you managed to get a good comeback from that. In fact, the other participant the previous time, Nkuli, she talked about the warfare, the lawfare.
Oh yes,
that really,
yes.
that really helps South Africa.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah,
yes.
but so I think she's a lawyer as well. So. We have another lawyer here. Do you want to maybe add something?
So when we talk about the language of ethics, we also talk about professional ethics. So the ethics of the profession, and every profession has its code of ethics. So, and if you really look at the word profession, it's I profess to have a skill, I profess to have an expertise, and then I render that expertise to you to further your aim or your objective. So there's already a relationship of trust there. That I'm coming to that. You know, that source of expertise, and I have a certain expectation, and that code of ethics generally then ushers in how one, whether you're a medical professional or an auditor or a lawyer, what that looks like. And yes, Zondo has certainly highlighted, especially in the auditing profession, in the consulting professions, a severe loss of trust in professions, because there's been a lot of skepticism around organizations that have lost their reputations because of associations that might have had it, and because of that have also lost business and have tried to almost have to restore their professional integrity after that. My colleague, Professor Deandra So, recently wrote an article about what he calls the wholesome threesome. And in the article, he reflects on the Edelman Trust Barometer. And in that, he says that as in South Africa, it's an international trust barometer, but the trust in government in South Africa is marginally low compared to trust in governments across the world. As opposed, and so we really rank far below. But if you look at trust in business in South Africa, we're in the 63%, which is about the international average. And how does one go about restoring trust? He says that what you need is ethics, the way we've talked about, competence, but also loyalty. So loyalty, not blind loyalty, but loyalty to the mandate of that organization which you are representing. Because every organization is in pursuit of a particular aim. So in public sector, we look at section 195 of the Constitution. It tells us that we must operate with a sense of professional ethics, and the same with our professions. And that's, it's really about going back to basics. What is that profession about, and how does one restore that trust through ethics, through display of competence, and through loyalty?
Wow. Do you want to say something?
Yes. You know, you reminded me when you said, when we were talking about the value system, and then you said education. Yeah? You know, I think one of the mistakes that were done when we, get into the new democratic government was that, some of the things, this say that you threw the baby with the bathwater. Yes. Remember, we used to have at school, even primary school, what we call social studies. I mean, social studies, it was about that, the issues of ethics, the issues, understanding, how the society operates, so, and that was dealt away with, so I think it should be one of the dialogues that need, or solutions that we could come up with, that we reintroduce that.
I'll give you now, but just to say to, please don't forget your thought. Just to say to our viewers, you still have an opportunity to write in. Someone will just make sure that I get your comments. I do have a comment here from the editor of Mail and Guardian. Look, He says, South Africa has always been a country that is far too comfortable with its gross inequality, at least among those of us that thrive in it. What does that say about our ethical compass as a collective now? Are we immoral for not doing enough to redress the imbalances? And I think the reason why this is quite important is because I wanted to ask the question, which is, why is this discussion or this topic relevant for the poor person on the street? Is it relevant for them?
Mm-hmm.
Is it, if we were to have an ethical leadership, what difference would they experience? Maybe you want to start with your point and then come back to that.
Okay. I was going to share to Bafedile's point to say that that I can teach someone ethics, but it doesn't make them ethical.
Yes.
You can be a cum laude ethics student, but that doesn't necessarily make you. And so in terms of the approach with schools, what we encourage is an approach of what we call schools as model communities. So like you were saying, show me rather than teach me. So create that because how our model development happens in communities. So we, from growing up and then socialization and schools and, relationships, etc. And so if we move towards creating our schools as model communities that shape future leaders, that's where a lot of that impact of the learning happens.
Yes.
And, so it's about then the leadership of the schools cognitively, consciously embarking on that journey, that we're creating model communities. We are exercising leadership, we're showing, and through that process creating. And just maybe to add one other point, the Public Service Commission, so Prof. Kenny and colleagues together with Father Mkhwanazi and colleagues are working together with the Department of Education to go into schools and then bring the constitutional values into the life orientation curriculum. But I know that through conversations that process is also happening.
It's happening, okay.
Yeah. And then perhaps just to add about, so I want to come back to the code for ethical leadership in local government. And essentially, it's a governance code. It is a model choice for leaders to do the right thing. I can't legislate for you to be ethical. It's not about compliance. But what the code says is it builds on our existing legislation and constitution, and it says that the spirit of ethical leadership is about acting in the best interest of the community and the society. Shall we make space?
Yes, we just have our our panelist. We've been waiting for you, man. Welcome. How are you doing? Yeah. Good to see you. Good to see you. Yes. We informed everyone that you'll be coming a bit late. You had an emergency to attend to, but we're so grateful that you made it in time, far earlier than we thought you could make it here, because we're thinking about the traffic and things like that. But this is Monde Lot Ndlovu. He's the managing director of the Black Management Forum. And I introduced him when he was not here. He's a thought leader, this guy, very, very bright man, and who is well known to so many of us. And I think his input is going to be quite useful. You've come at a very appropriate time, because we were sort of pivoting towards saying, ethical leadership. Why does it matter for people that are poor, that have no houses? Why is this thing for that small business person out there who feels like this economy is not for me, this place is for others? So as a way of welcoming you, I just want to give you a chance to breathe. Are you fine?
No, I'm okay.
Are you okay? All right. Okay. Tell us a bit about the work that you do at BMF and the work that you do in terms of ethical leadership, because I know this is a passion of yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kulati, and good evening to fellow colleagues and colleagues who are joining in online. Firstly, the Black Management Forum is a 48-year-old organization. It was premised when it began on the development of management capacity, development of leadership, primarily among Black people, because even at that time, you're not even allowed to be called a Black manager if you were a Black manager. Right? So there were those issues at the time, and secondly, to support those who were in those spaces who were Black leaders. Supported how? They were supported by gathering together, grouping together, discussing, sharing ideas. In the 70s, this is because it was very, very tough. And even when we started, the security branch was even onto the BMF because the rumor was, there's this new Black organization that is starting. We don't know what it's going to do in South Africa and its impact. So even the BMF itself, at its inception, it really came at about when the apartheid government was really becoming even more heavy-handed on new organizations that begin. So that is the premise of it. And then thirdly, if you then want Black management to develop and to thrive, you've got to look at the environment. So you're also the creation of your socio-political environment. That is why you now also exist. Then we started to advocate for not only the development of Black management, Black leadership particularly, also the issue of ethics. We'll come back to that as well. So how then do we get this scale of leadership in the country to thrive right across? There's something wrong with the soil, which is the environment. So now we need to pay attention to the soil, because we can develop as much as we want, but if the soil is not ready for the input that we require, we will not yield the kind of results that we desire. So there's something wrong, fundamentally wrong, with the environment in which we operate in. Even then, till today, we're still experiencing the legacy of the environmental challenges around the development, the expression of leadership right across. So we then started to advocate for socioeconomic transformation. So on the one side, we're developing leadership. On the other side, we're advocating for socioeconomic transformation in South Africa. And we even said, and beyond. So in a nutshell, those are the three pillars. That's three pillars that stand on the BMF. We develop on one side, we discuss and meet. That's the forum side, and then on the third side is the advocacy side. So we were the forerunners. We're the midwife to Employment Equity Act, which was forerunner of affirmative action. The forerunner before that is the Sullivan Codes, etc., etc. And then also the midwife of the BBBE Commission of 1998. And it was our resolution in 1997 that this whole BE thing in South Africa is not gaining sufficient traction. There's too many different definitions, too many different directions. Let's come together and let's engage government that we need a commission. So we called for that in 1997. And then we established also part of the Black Business Council, which started at the time because there needed to be proper oversight. So the BMF then came about, and they said, no, we can move the oversight function to BBC. We'll continue to focus on management control, employment equity, and the movement of management within the country. So in a nutshell, that is who we are. There's other legs to it, but briefly, we develop on one side, we discuss, there's the forum side, and then we advocate on the other side.
All right. So she was one of the forerunners of PMF, in Pretoria.
Yes.
But I think now that we've gotten a bit more about the PMF, I do want us maybe to engage in this conversation. Why is ethical leadership relevant for the poor business person who sells on the street, for the person who stays in the shack? What is going to change for them, or what should change for them if we're to have, just in this coming election, we just have suddenly a crop of people that were trained by you who embrace the idea of ethical leadership, and they do it. What should we expect to change? And the question that Luke had asked here, I don't know if you can think about it. Luke is the Mail and Guardian editor. He says here, South Africa has always been a country that is far too comfortable with its gross inequality, at least among those of us that thrive in it. What does that say about our ethical campus as a collective? Are we immoral for not doing enough to redress the imbalances? And I think this issue of redressing the imbalances, it's an important one. when you're talking about ethical leadership? Anyone who wants to go first? You're still fresh.
Maybe.
Okay,
Go ahead.
are you sure?
I'm sure, yes.
Okay. No, I'm glad I'm with a fellow PMF on the panel, which is great.
Yeah.
Why is ethics important, irrespective of what's happening in the political space? Conduct is a reflection of your own personal standing in terms of your value system and your principles, which is fundamental. So we're not ethical in order to transform. We're ethical because it's the right thing to do. So whether you are running a small business or you're running big business, the level of accountability remains the same because you're operating in this environment that you are influencing in one way or another. Not just other businesses, you're also influencing fellow peers, influencing family, local community, etc. We've been celebrating Dr. Samuel Mkhwanazi, who recently passed away at the age of 97. And he has been that ethical code, that compass for all of us amongst his contemporaries, that in fact, you actually don't need to be unethical in order to progress and be successful and to make a difference. In actual fact, in order to sustain success, ethics are paramount. So continuously doing the right thing is the base, is the bedrock, is the anchor of sustainability. So whether you're doing something when no one is looking, it will catch up with you one way or another, if not in your lifetime, but in the successive generations, which is therefore why it's critical to place ethical conduct where it really matters most, where you're thinking in your value system and your principles.
All right. Thank you so much. I see you wanted to say something, Bafedile, and then we'll come to you, Ronny.
Okay.
Yeah.
Ethics. I know we're talking leadership. However, it is, a value that applies to all the citizens of the country. The reason I'm talking about the citizens of the country is because you said that how is this discussion benefiting the people, everyone in the country?
Yes. Yeah.
We need to have citizens or communities that are also ethical. Let's give an example of integrity that you just talked to. When I launch my book, I'll always talk about this issue.
Yeah.
That you just said that integrity is doing the right thing even if no one is watching.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why do we have people who would only put on a seatbelt when they see the
police
traffic cop?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. So when we talk now here, we're talking to everyone.
Yeah.
However, not everyone can be in leadership position. But the leaders themselves, if they are ethical, they also need support from the citizens that are ethical for us to end up, as a good country, lack of a better way. Yes. And also, the issue of democracy is a concept of freedom.
Yeah.
So the people, you can see there's still disparity between the haves and the have-nots, or the poor.
Inequality.
You understand? Yes. So as we speak now, they would need, especially the have-nots, then they will understand why there are these problems. And it's because of lack of ethical leaders. Yes. And as we explain, they will understand what is an ethical leader. So they'll start observing and watching their leaders to see if they behave in the manner in which we are talking here. Yes. So some who may even approach those leaders because now they know they can even approach them and tell them that you are not doing things right. You know.
So I do want to come back to this because I recently traveled. The country will never be mentioned, but I traveled to a country, just one airport. 5 people wanted bribes from me.
Yes.
From the first immigration official. You know, can you imagine that? So, and it's not the fact that there were no leaders. There were everyone, even the senior leaderships were there in that place. So this is a big problem that we're talking about when we're now talking about society and so on. But you wanted to say something, and I'll come to you.
Thank you. And I just want to pick up on those very important points that Bafedile is raising, because in the Code for Ethical Leadership, the fundamental departure point is the spirit of ethical leadership. So it encourages leaders to act in that spirit. And what is that spirit? It's about asking yourself, is this decision that I'm about to take or this action that I'm about to do in the long-term sustainable interest of the municipality and all its communities, not just the community that voted for me. Right? And then in order to, what the code then does is it sets out 7 core principles, a lot of which we've talked about today. It's about creating an ethical culture or setting the tone. So we say culture is the way we do things in our around here, simply put. And as we've been talking about here, the sort of ethical culture we want is that culture that is easy for people to do the right thing, whether someone's watching or someone's not watching. And also then ensuring that we appoint the right people, respecting the political administrative interface, respecting our levels of competency on our structures, and also engaging with mutual respect. Now, the idea of the code is that through the exercise of the spirit of ethical leadership and the principles, we work towards certain outcomes. And in doing this, the first of that outcome is an ethical culture. The second then is a well-functioning institution. And if you have a well-functioning institution, it then delivers on its mandates. So it provides services. So that's how it affects the person on the street. Because if you are meant to be providing water, and if you have a well-functioning institution, then those mandates start to get fulfilled. And if you fulfill those mandates, and earlier Bafedile was saying, what's the issue people are complaining about now most? It's service delivery. And if you deliver on services, that's how you get trust. So it's that cyclical effect that we can't negate the impact of governance and the link on service delivery. And as we improve ethical leadership, we have leaders in place who ensure that those institutions are able to achieve its mandate. Maybe just before I end off, the second thing also is a critical part about ethical leadership is ensuring stability in the institutions. And a big part of stability is creating an environment for business to come in where they're able to thrive. They're able to function where there is trust. Because if businesses pull out from our communities, then it impacts on the tax base. And if the tax base is lowers, then the citizens feel the impact. So that cyclical effect about the impact of ethical leadership is so critical to how services are rendered and the impact that it then has on the person on the road.
I think you know, the individual ethical characters of the citizens form the collective character of the nation. So that's why integrity is important to the man on the street as well, because if you think about it, it's almost like integrity has a twin brother and sister, you know, ethics, which would be integrity and humility, because for you to have, a character of integrity and ethics, it's presupposed by the fact that you're willing to be tolerant, to listen to differing views and so forth. And I think that in the main seems to be what is slipping away from us. You know, the ability to agree to disagree and to have conversations. And as a result, we seem to then shy away from the issues and avoid, the uncomfortable conversations because, we have that gap between, the leadership who we sort of think must have their own, ethics, and then there's a different one that applies to everyone else. So integrity for the man on the street means that what they see is what they get. You know, I think it has to start there to say that when there's integrity in the governance, you know, or ethics, ethical leadership in the governance of institutions, it means when we say there will be water, when I open the tap, there will be water. You know, if there is no water, there will be someone who will explain to me what the issues are and what we are doing to resolve this and all of that. But I've also seen, in a sense, I actually asked a question to one of the, you know, spokespersons that I know in the state environment to say, why do I have a sense that, you know, the communication that comes from the state is always defensive? You know, there is no willingness to accede to you know, challenges and that form. And there's no way we're going to improve if you are not willing to listen, you know, to what other people say and so forth. So ethics is important because you know, it also means that in the families, as we've said, we need to go back, you know, and start, you know, remembering that where we come from shapes who we become, and the schooling system to also integrate that. But it is important to everyone, you know, even if it's just for integrity's sake, you know, for you to want to have a better society. Because if all of us were lacked integrity, we wouldn't be able to run anything, because we'd all be imagining, you know, ghosts when we're supposed to be at rest, you know, that I wonder what that one is doing now, you know, as we're sitting here. And you've seen in countries where, you know, there's been an erosion of ethics and integrity. You have countries where there's lots of big houses with swimming pools, but a very low tax base in terms of people who are paying their taxes and all of that. And that means that integrity is impacting, as Fatima was saying, on the general population, because we've got all these people who are supposed to be paying taxes are under declaring on their taxes, you know, so they can live a better life, and that impacts the delivery that the general population should be getting, and so on. You know, so it's really a collective responsibility of each one of us to want to be better than yesterday. You know, and I think it was Utata who's famously credited for this quote that said, you know, that a saint is a sinner that keeps trying, you know, and I suppose that, you know, that should be our mission, you know, to become better people. Because think about it, a lack of ethics means lawlessness. If you think about it, because then everybody is having a party, you know, when you're looking that way, I take this. When, you know, Fatima's looking the other way, I take that. And if you think about it, it's also important for the man on the street, because somehow there's a you know, I would say an emotional or spiritual connection to business, if you think about it. Because how often does someone come to your house, fixes your geyser and leaves, and then gives you the invoice and then he goes? You know, because he has faith that you're going to pay him because he delivered a service to you, you know. But now imagine if that doesn't happen. And in fact, Patrick, the worst case scenario, which I recall now, which I've always said to people, is that imagine getting to a point where when you go to an ATM, you have to count your money when it comes out from the ATM.
Rent for rent.
This queue, like, I took out 1,000, but I'm not sure that it could be 1,000. You know, I could be shortchanged. So I guess it comes out as a, you know, as a favor, but it really shows you the extent to which it could get worse, you know. And then I want to conclude this by saying that I believe that the majority of our citizens are people of ethics and integrity, because I promise you, if they, in other words, what I'm saying is there are more people who are good people than the bad elements that we have in society. And that's why we still have a country. So we need to then multiply, you know, those people and start with the ones that are already in the education system who wants to become something in society, and at least start to empower them so that they grow with this culture into whatever they become, right? Especially as Fatima said, we can't legislate you into being an ethical person. It's an individual choice. And we can only help start the dialogue so that you can ask yourself questions as a person to say, where do I stand on this continuum, you know?
Sure. Look, I do want, because you are here, you know, I know that we're urging towards the end, but just on this issue, Monde, of the link between ethics or ethical leadership and socio-economic transformation. There were stories when you were talking about BEE that companies would front, for example, instead of really making what is right, you know, but they would just front, pay someone and so on. I remember reading a story about one business taking an old domestic worker who didn't even know that their names were written there. But there are also big companies that are holding on money, trillions of monies that they should actually be plowing into the economy. Is it a matter of ethics, or is it a matter of feeling that we don't trust the public sector policies, we don't trust the government? So you can take it whatever way you want.
Well, thank you, Mr. Kulati. It's a very challenging, it's a very challenging notion, very challenging question, which is multi-layered. And of course, we cannot fully dissect it. But let me also recycle back. So you have the existence of the DTIC, Department of Trade, Industry and Competition, right? So what is the role of the competition aspect? Right? There's a competition commission. Then there's a competition tribunal. They investigate the behavior of business in the system. Right? So we saw issues around the rand, price fixing, etc. These are old behaviors which still find expression in the kind of system that we have currently. So when you have the emergence of triple BEE in the space, triple BEE now is an industry. I mean, you look at all the tapestry of it. You look at the verification agencies. You look at the whole system. It's an industry on its own. It will be professionals that are coming, transformation managers. And you ask yourself, what are we trying to achieve? So take a step back. So there is this a tree in Afrikaans they call it Vachabiki. Right? So you can't run through it, right? Because if you run through it, you're going to hurt yourself. So it's a Vachabiki because it's this way. So it's got thorns. So once you touch it, immediately you must go back. So the reason why I'm raising the competition issue is because the deeper systemic challenges of running business in South Africa is old order. So the behaviors that we've seen historically still find expression in how we run business today, not because we want to, but because we have not thoroughly challenged the fact that we've got an old order way of thinking about how to run business. So you can even talk about Ubuntu. Ubuntu has probably been one of the misused African concepts because people talk about Ubuntu in business but still be unethical. They'll talk about Ubuntu and misapply it, right, in their conduct and how the business thinks, and then transformation becomes a tick box exercise. But then they'll talk about Ubuntu. So we need to take a step back. In the next 30 years of democracy, around this matter, for me, when there's a competition commission, it tells you that there's been a long-standing challenge with behavior and also thinking. Yesterday, I was in a conversation, I won't mention this organization, and they actually said, they're almost admitting that we almost failed in changing the thinking and the behaviors of the current generation of leadership. We need to develop a new creed of leadership in the country. So it's a progressive thought, but it's a challenging thought to say, really, we can't really change our thought process. And actually, Nelson Mandela, and he needs to be accredited over and over again, his ability to bring an idea and bring people together to try and change the thinking, because that's what he was dealing with, right? Let's disband the armed struggle. Let's talk. Let's engage. Let's not be afraid to call a spade a spade. And with transformation now, the behaviors, what I'm basically saying, we're not surprised that there's fronting in triple BE because there's been fronting in other industries. There's been fronting in leadership, which is old order. It's not a new thing. It's actually a perpetuation of what is currently been existing. So even with maybe a second last comment, even with the industries, there's 3, 4, 5 big major players in every industry. Even a new industry comes up in South Africa, even this green industry, you will see there will be 3, 4, 5 big major players, big business. You look at the JSC, 3, 4, 5 major players in every industry. Is that a coincidence? It's not. It is not a coincidence. And therefore, it is part of the historical issue of how this economy is structured. So you've got to deal with the structure of the economy so that you start changing the expectation of leadership right across and expectation of the masses. And I also want to say that the spirit then therefore of the country is based on who has moral authority and who doesn't. And when there is no moral authority, the spirit of the nation, the soul of the nation, then the man on the street, when they look at 2BE, they say, no, this is not for us. And that is not correct. So we've got to Biki. We've got to look at the systemic issues that have created the challenges. Because even with the advent of 2BE, it has made even other white millionaires in the country. Right? It is a fact. So we need to take a step back to say, what have we created? What is it that we want to still change in the next 30 years? And I agree with President Mbeki that there needs to be a national dialogue post the elections. And there needs to be key players there to really look at this question. Because if the system, the economic system in this country does not begin to move a certain direction, we're actually calling for a revolution ourselves in the long term. And we've seen pockets of it almost coming up, but we remain hopeful because we have leadership here. We have yourself at GGA that's bringing us together to try and begin to unlock some of these issues as we wache biki. So it's multi-layered. This question of why is there fronting? It's a continuation of the existing behavior that's been here for very, 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 very long time. And you look at the TRC. I'm not stopping this. Look at the TRC, right? Look at the TRC and the records of the TRC. We made submissions, Black Business made submissions about the violations of human rights at the TRC. And you look at the report which was generated by the emeritus, the late Desmond Tutu, and some of his recommendations. Not all the recommendations have been applied. But others have been with a special task team force, which is under the NPA, which looks for all those cases of people who went missing and died in graves, and there's still a backlog just on that, right? What about other areas of our society? So we really need to take a serious critical look to say we've got backlogs here, and we want a new business culture. We want a new leadership culture. And then what is then the role that must be played? Because we need to continue to construct and reconstruct certain areas.
All right.
And that needs a certain kind of leadership.
Okay. We're gonna wrap up now because I'm looking at the time, but the conversation is so deep and it's so wide. I mean, who would have thought that would land where we have landed, talking about these issues that we're now talking about. I'm going to give you now, but as we conclude, I'd like us to start exploring solutions about what can be done, for example, in the area of education and awareness. I think we've spoken about that. Maybe we can concretize some ideas. Institutional reforms, are there institutional reforms that need to take place around the issue of entrenching ethical leadership, behavior, integrity, and so on? Leadership development. I mean, universities have courses, organizations like the Ethics Institute have courses. Do we have enough? Are we training the upcoming leadership enough so that we can have what I prefer to call, I wrote an article where I call for a caring leadership. Because my sense is that once people care and have love for the people, they probably would behave differently. Just like when you love your family or your children, you just don't do any harm. Civil society engagement. Let's just, discuss the solutions. I mean, I've mentioned some of the areas here, but you may have thought of others or you may have different ideas. Fatima?
Sure, thank you. So one of the things that the Code for Ethical Leadership does is, in addition to talking to leaders, it does talk to other stakeholders, because leaders don't exist in isolation. And it then does talk to communities, it does talk to business, it does talk to political parties in terms of their role of creating that enabling environment for ethical leadership to thrive. And the idea is that there is that collective responsibility and ability to hold each other to account.
Yes.
And that's important in this conversation for us to recognize that. Then I want to pick up on the the elements around, often when we do training, there's this conversation about the difference between ethics and the law. And that critical the distinction. And, people can be compliant on the face of it, but they can be maliciously compliant. And just these examples that we've had around PE so strongly speak to that. And, often we
That's
say
an interesting concept.
that ethics floats on the sea of the law, and often the law plays catch up. And when we talk about ethical leadership, we say there's characteristics of leaders, what are typical. So humanness is one of them. But then we talk about competency. So it doesn't mean that you're born a leader. You have to develop or grow these competencies. And they are behavioral competencies, they're cognitive competencies, they're managerial competencies. And when we talk about growing leaders, we have to recognize that these competencies are critical and that we need to develop those through training, through practice, through experience, and ensure that it's not just about an academic exercise. And then in addition to those competencies, depending on where you are in the organization, whether you are a governing body member or whether you are a CEO or whether you are a champion of ethics in your organization, there are tasks that you then have that are related to how you drive ethics within the organization. And it's about understanding that we all have different roles to play, but ethics is everybody's business. It's the tone at the top, it's the mood in the middle, it's the groundswell at the bottom, but understanding what each of that looks like. So in our work as the Ethics Institute, we provide assessments to organizations. We're seeing a lot of organizations who are coming with requests from their governing bodies to say, do something called an ethics risk assessment for us. Help us understand what are the things in our environment that are getting in the way of us being ethical. And then help us to chart how we move from that to move forward. And it's very much grounded around the governance of ethics framework, which sits in the heart of the King Code of Corporate Governance. So all our work, whether it's advisory, whether it's training, whether it's assessment, is sitting around that framework, which dovetails with what King is talking about in terms of ethics and ethical leadership. And I just want to encourage that if people are keen, we've got a range of free downloadable resources on our website that talk about ethical leadership, that talk about ethical culture, that talk about roles and responsibilities that can be accessed to make ethics real and debunk this myth around ethics so that it becomes more realistic.
I mean, I think a week or so before, I met with your CEO, Lisa Grunewald, and we were talking about this conference that you guys are planning to attend that, to learn more about this topic. But as we wrap up, thank you so much for that. I just want to come to you, Bafedile, in your last remarks on this. You've written a book which is called A Government on Life Support, Win It Off. I mean, I'm quite looking forward to reading that book. From you, what needs to be done? What needs to be done to entrench ethics culture?
I'm looking at where we are as the country now, and I'm thinking of what kind of leadership from our children. What kind are we breeding? There's a need for an intervention, at that level. And it's one of the recommendations in the book.
At the level of children?
When I say students, I'm just saying a new cadre of public servants, whether they are going to work in government or in the private sector. Ethical leadership cuts across, even in private sector, we need that. But as long as we can have that training for these children when they are still young, they are not yet, maybe when they are at tertiary education, where they are there, and then they are about to go into the market, we need to grab them. Yes, so that we start developing them from there. And then the other thing, well, I don't know, but I'm sure it will contribute to that. What I'm going to say. we've all agreed that, you know, public servants are painted with the same brush, corrupt and all that.
All of them.
All of them. But there are pockets. There are pockets of public servants who are actually doing their best. And I said earlier on when we were discussing that even when you do a SWOT analysis for your company, you don't only look at the weaknesses, you know, and you look at the opportunities and the strength of your company, and you capitalize on the strength. So now these public servants who are there, you know, frustrated, wanting to do the job, who's looking after them? Who's supporting them? Who's encouraging them to carry on, and that giving them hope that it will be okay. So we need to recognize such public servants. And my parting shot is that to everyone, leaders, citizens, that you must be the change you want to see. Yeah.
All right.
And the difference we want to experience.
Thank you so much for that, because I think we've spoken so much about private sector and the public sector, but there's a civil sector. You know, there's a lot of problems there, like NGOs, you know, mosques, churches, and all of that kind of stuff, where a lot of problems. Maybe we'll have time to talk about that. Your parting shot?
I think, you know, we have a head start because we have Ubuntu. You know, as a foundation, I take it as South Africans and as Africans perhaps in general. And I mean, even if you look at, you know, traditional courts or tribal law, whatever you want to call it, the principles are based on fairness and justice and so on. You know, you can't take what doesn't belong to you. You know, if you do, there's a punishment, whatever the case might be. So I think that is a good start to have, because we already have that foundation, you know, from our cultural / traditional heritage as people. And I think it's a societal responsibility. It has to start in the home. You know, it has to start in the family, where we have this kind of conversations with our children, with our family, and asking them what do you understand, what ethics is, how do you apply those kind of things, you know, because what I've seen now is that people have a general sense of, you know, it's not me. There's some person who's going to come and sort out all the challenges we have. And unfortunately, that is a very tragic conclusion, you know, because the reality is there is no other one. You know, we are the generation that we've been waiting for, you know, to lead the discourse and to lead by example and to be bold. I mean, the boldness we're talking about is a factual thing, you know, because it means that, you know, you sort of say, if I can give you an example, I've seen, you know, in institutions where they do, you know, strategic plans and stuff, and then you have an item there, Black economic empowerment, you know, empower small, you know, businesses, etc. Quantity 10. Really 10? Like, can you do 20? You know, 100? you know, in a sense. So I really honestly believe that, you know, we still have an opportunity, you know. These are the type of talks when I do talks with high schools. In fact, I even do some in primary school, because I was told that maybe you need to start with the grade 5, grade 6, somewhere there, you know. They're still young and nimble, at least sow the seed, you know, so that they can grow into, you know, having a vision of aspiring to become something. So we need to start there as the adults in the family to lead by example, to have ethical leadership, and to then, you know, show our coming generation the way, you know. Unfortunately, right now we're competing with many external factors, you know. You'll recall, Patrick, when it was you and your parents and your siblings, and the extended family, and now it's the kid and the iPhone, or whatever other phone they are using, you know? So you have this competing values. You know, you have these competing values that are staring at you on a daily basis. So it's important that, you know, we get involved at that level, you know, and I always advocate to, you know, especially Black professionals, to say that you know, we have such an important role to play right now. And one of them is having this type of discussions, you know, talking to kids at school, talking to communities, etc. Because the reality is that we cannot succeed if the majority of our people are failing. You know, that's just the recipe for disaster, you know. So I think, you know, a capacity building knowledge ongoing, both in the home, both in the businesses. Our businesses need to be having these discussions, you know. Our board need to bring in everybody in the organization to teach them about ethics and what it means and so forth. So I really think there's an opportunity to do that, but it starts with us to lead the conversation.
One of the discussions I want to have one day is the discussion on the issue of entertainment development. If you look at the amount of money that we spend, time we spend on entertainment. But the discussion for another time. The last but not the least, can you just give us your parting shot?
Okay, no, thank you very much, Patrick Kulati. I really appreciate it. The United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, one of them is leave no one behind. Very critical, crucial, sustainable goal that must be at the forefront of everything that we do. Number two, the issue of taking proper care before major decisions are taken. Lot of people used to say leaders should tremble each time before they exercise their responsibility. Because what they do now.
You want to say, my dad used to say.
No. Which plot?
Go ahead. Yeah.
So, all right. So he used to say, leaders must pay attention before they make crucial decisions. For what they do now will eventually impact the community out there. So that is in of in itself a summary of the kind of leadership that we want before these crucial decisions are taken, whether in business, whether in civil society, whether in government, etc. How will this impact society tomorrow? And this goes back then to the issue of, you know, we need some kind of PIO monitoring mechanism.
What is PIO?
So poverty, inequality, unemployment.
Okay.
So yes, that's SA does great work with unemployment, etc. We've got those numbers, but in terms of the goals, so we've never had our government, even business, come out and say we would like to reduce poverty, inequality, and unemployment by such a percentage by the end of this financial year end. There's no conversation like currently like that. We need to see how we can influence that type of thinking to say what are the PUI or PIU goals for this year. And when the president stands up, whoever the president is in South Africa, from a political point of view, this year we want to reduce poverty by X amount, and so that it focuses everybody, like the Bumiputra in Malaysia, etc. I mean, even the man on the street could articulate at some point what the economic development program of the nation is, right? So we need that kind of focus, irrespective of who's in political power or who's in business power. They need that focus. So we know that the triple challenges are fundamental to try and shift our society. So we've got to focus on that. So how are these decisions going to impact, and how will they reduce the triple challenges in South Africa, both in business, etc. And in business, one of the ways in which you can reduce that is ESD. ESD, in fact, if you look at the budgets of companies, they run into the billions. But you look at the businesses that they put money into, they're not necessarily having serious economic impact. So we need to challenge them to say ESD programs, especially in the key economic driving industries, banking, finance, financial sector, etc. Are you putting in money into your own future competition instead of putting in money to different industry, which is almost got nothing to do with you, because it also makes skills transfer a little bit easier if you have an ESD program that says, as a bank, we are going to put money into a future bank, which is black run, black managed, etc. And then you can see the trickle down effect. You can actually see the impact of black economic empowerment. So that's why, you know, we need to look at how these triple challenges find expression in the decision-making process. That do they ultimately reduce the triple challenges? If they do not, we're having the wrong conversations.
Well, what a way to complete and conclude this conversation. You know, good governance is really part of good governance is ethical leadership, you know, accountability, transformation, integrity. So as Good Governance Africa, this conversation is very important to us, because what we're trying to do is to create an Africa where leaders care about people, where governments are effective, where poverty is reduced, where businesses thrive. You see, that is very important so that we can take the continent to the next level. And so this conversation that we're having here today, to those of you who are joining us online, is part of a series of webinars that we are doing in partnership with the Mail and Guardian. We're going to do the next one now in 2 weeks' time. And we're going to be focusing on young people on that one. How are they seeing things, especially the ones that were born around 1994, so that we can look at, you know, their experiences, what their hopes are. And then after the elections, we're going to have the last one, which is going to look back and say how things are going. And so with that, I really want to say thank you so much to all of you who have joined us today, but also especially to our panelists here. And I think you guys have done a great job. And I wish you all the very best in your various endeavors. And I think there's a lot that I mean, I like what you guys were saying, that there's more people doing great work in our country, but we're not profiling them enough. We always read or hear about all the bad apples, but in actual fact, the reason why the country is still standing, it is because of people like whistleblowers, institutions of democracy, the legal, you know, judiciary, and you know, what is that? You know, this Chapter 9 institutions that make it possible that we're here today. So there's a lot going. That's good, but we still need ethical leadership. And if that happens, a lot of the problems that we have in our country will slowly be done. So I really want to say thank you so much. And please enjoy your evening, and good night at home. Thank you so much for joining us today. Join us again in a few weeks' time, in 2 weeks' time, on a Tuesday at 5 o'clock. Thank you. Thank you.